Welcome to another enterprise session from the University of Bristol. My name is Professor Michele Barbour, and today I'm very fortunate to be talking to Dr. Rebecca Shepherd, who is Senior Lecturer in Anatomy in our School of Anatomy. Rebecca, I'm really grateful to you for finding the time to speak with me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your day job before we move on to the enterprise elements of what you do?
So, as you mentioned, I'm a senior lecturer in human anatomy here at Bristol School of Anatomy, and I'm the deputy programme director for the Applied Anatomy degree scheme. So, a lot of my day job involves teaching pure anatomy students and then across teach on medicine, dentistry, sometimes veterinary sciences, although that's not always my background. And I have research interests in bone biology and in ivory identification.
Fantastic. So it's the teaching aspects of it are fascinating, and my dental students benefit from some of your teaching, but it's the research that's more the subject of today's discussion. So let me drill into that a little bit. I guess for those who aren't anatomists or familiar with anatomy, what does research look like in anatomy? What is not known that we still need to find out in anatomical sciences?
So it's a common misconception in anatomy that we've discovered everything and that there's no research left to do. And this is, in fact, one of the seminars that I run with my third years. So there's all sorts of research that happens in anatomy, and it can be from looking at what people might typically imagine as anatomy research. So looking at variations in humans when some people's blood vessels do strange things or their body parts might be on the wrong side of the body. There's that sort of gross dissection and describing new things found in the human body. There's also lots of other things that might surprise people. So, for example, I think it was 2018, there was a paper published that described the fibella, which means little bean bone. And this one is found at the back of the knee. And although it had been characterized about 100 years ago, it's thought to be becoming more prevalent in people as we've got better nutrition and we're generally a bit heavier. And it's thought to develop at the back of the knee to help stabilize the knee joint. So there's things that pop up that might be surprising. There's lots of other things that anatomists do, though. So we have veterinary anatomists, and they do research in a wide range of things. So from sort of paleontology through to animal conservation. And my own research interests are in musculoskeletal anatomy, particularly in bone biology, which is where everything sort of stems from. That was my PhD. I spent lots of time pipetting small liquids from one tube to another.
That's PhDs for you.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So before we get into your research, how did you get into anatomy? Was it something you always knew you were interested in, or something you found along the way?
I fell into it completely accidentally. I was never really sure what I wanted to do at university. I ended up studying biomedical science as my undergrad. During my undergraduate degree, I took a placement and I spent a year working in an NHS laboratory where I gained Institute of Biomedical Science accreditation to call myself a biomedical scientist or a healthcare scientist when I graduated. So on graduating from my undergrad, I did go and work in the NHS for a few years where I worked in a histology lab. So slicing tissue very thinly and staining it all sorts of pretty colours, doing lots of is this cancer, is it not cancer, diagnostics. And I enjoyed that, but I sort of got to the point I'd always wanted to do postgraduate study. I couldn't necessarily afford to go do a master's straight after my undergraduate. And I was just really fortunate that a PhD close to the hospital I was working at that was very histology based in techniques was being advertised. So I applied for that and I got it.
Great.
And so it was through doing my PhD, I got involved with anatomy demonstrating. And I was teaching medical students, first year medical students, I was teaching them gross anatomy, histology, and that's how I fell into anatomy teaching initially.
Fantastic. So your anatomy teaching led you to anatomy research, and you're interested in bones. Tell us a little bit more. What about bones? What interests you? What are you trying to learn or find out?
So my PhD was based on studying the fat cells inside your bones. So you have lots of bones in your body. Some bones, big bones like the femur, so your thigh bone, is described as being a long bone. And what this means is that it's got a hard outer layer, and on the inside we have like a spongy honeycomb bit of bone. And in there, that's where blood cells are made, and it's where we store up to about 10% of our body fat is actually found inside our bones. So my PhD was looking at what happens to the fat cells inside your bones and whether or not this influences the progression of bone disorders such as osteoarthritis. From there, my interests really have looked a lot at the extracellular matrix, so the bits in between the cells of the bones, and sort of collagens and how those change with disease.
Fascinating. And I can see how that must have bearing for a lot of science beyond anatomy. I mean, this is relevant for medicine. I imagine you must have to collaborate with other types of biological scientists in that kind of endeavour, right?
Yes, I'm really lucky in that I've made lots of really good collaborations. I worked closely with the hospitals, my previous university. And yes, I work with people from biology to chemistry to data science.
Fantastic. A nice interdisciplinary start to our conversation, but I have a hunch it's going to get more interdisciplinary as we go. All right. So your research is broad and has lots of fascinating medical implications, but you're also one of our University Enterprise Fellows, which means you must be doing something entrepreneurial. So tell us a little bit about what led up to your becoming an Enterprise Fellow and you're pursuing a sort of entrepreneurial angle to your research.
So, during my PhD, I had lots of ideas and I was always starting little side projects. But while I was doing my PhD, there's not many famous anatomists in the UK. And I noticed that Professor Alice Roberts, who is TV anatomist and head of public engagement at Birmingham, she was doing a tour of one of her books that she had just published. And being a fan and having read all her books, I decided to send her an email and invite her to come for lunch with the anatomy team at Lancaster. I kind of thought that my email would just go straight into a spam box and I'd never hear anything back. But to my surprise, she did reply and she came and she had lunch with us. Over lunch, she mentioned that at a dig site, an archaeological team had found some ivory rings. And they didn't know whether these were made of mammoth or of elephant ivory. And because they're interested in archaeology, which isn't something I'll pretend to know anything about, this was interesting to them because it would tell them whether it came into the UK via an African or a European trading route at a time when they're not really sure how things were traded. I would have said absolutely anything to impress Prof. Alice Roberts. So I piped up with, I'm sure we can do that for you, but I'll need some reference material. So Alice Roberts kindly put me in touch with Professor Adrian Lister from the Natural History Museum, who gave me access to some woolly mammoth ivory, some African elephant ivory, and some Asian elephant ivory. And there was a technique that was being used within my research group at Lancaster called Raman spectroscopy. And this is a non-destructive technique that basically uses energy in the form of light. So you shine a laser at the sample. What this does is it makes the bonds between the molecules in a sample vibrate and spit that energy back out at either a higher, a lower, or the same wavelength than the energy that went in. And you can detect these differences, and these different changes correspond to different molecular bonds. And so from shining just a bit of light at a sample, you can get really detailed biochemical information. So I decided that we would have a go and see if this could tell the difference between different species of elephant. And thankfully, it worked, because otherwise that would have been embarrassing to just have to give all the material back and go, no, I was just wrong.
So when you assured TV's Professor Alice Roberts that you could tell the difference between two ivories, did you, in the heat of the moment over lunch with your celebrity hero, did you have a plan that it would be ramen, or were you just thinking, I'm going to throw a bunch of techniques at it and see what I get?
Very much the latter.
I love it. But it's the optimism of the scientists, right? Particularly the young scientists. Like, I can do that. Don't know how yet, but I'll find a way.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you got a hold of these specimens from the Natural History Museum. You were able to take some spectra. In the first instance, could you just see that the spectra were different? Or could you already see what the differences signified in some way?
We could see there were differences. Surprisingly, we thought with the mammoth ivory that it would be the collagen, because we thought, obviously, the mammoth's very old, some of them 10, 20,000 years old. But because lots of the mammoth ivory had been perfectly preserved up until only about sort of 100, less than 100 years ago, the collagen signals that we were getting were still really strong. But there were differences we could see between sort of the mineral component of the ivory and that collagen components. There were differences we could see. And so I did some fairly standard techniques for analysing differences, and we were just really lucky that it showed we could quite accurately tell the difference between different species.
I love this idea of, I sometimes fear that PhD students now, and you and I both have PhD students, are so focused on their core project and what's going to go in their thesis that they either don't feel motivated or don't feel empowered to go off on these little side quests, if I can call it that. This wasn't part of your PhD, and yet you had the wherewithal and the determination, the interest to go and do something with your time that was a little bit on the side. I mean, I don't want to say, is that important? Because it's a bit of a leading question, but can we reflect on that? Because I worry that that's being lost. And I think that's such an important part of being a researcher.
Yeah, I agree. I think in a way, I'm really glad that I went back to do my PhD after working for a bit, because I came in that just a little bit older, having got some confidence, already had semi-established a career that I knew I was good at. So I think it was coming in with that confidence. And so I actually started my PhD when my eldest son was 1 year old. And so there was an element as well that my PhD couldn't be the be all and end all for me. And I had to be fairly disciplined in that. So there were some nights I worked late, and particularly because the nature of my PhD, I was collecting specimens from hospitals. Of course, the surgeon's going to take someone's femoral head at 5:30 on a Friday, and that's when it needs collecting. But on the whole, I was fairly disciplined in working 9 to 5 because that's when I had childcare.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a mixture of that confidence and just having been in a working environment. I was happy in saying, no, these are my boundaries. Also, I know I can get that done. There's a bit of spare time here. Or, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we could just fit that in as well? And I suppose my biggest tip for PhD students would be, I wouldn't necessarily go for the most famous supervisor. I would interview your supervisor. So when you're going for the interview, make sure that this is someone that you could work with for the next 3 years.
Absolutely.
I absolutely loved doing my PhD. I had 2 fantastic supervisors who I'm still really close with. And I think that makes all the difference. They quickly realised that I liked to be left alone and I could just crack on and do things. I would ask for help if I needed. Occasionally they did say, okay, Rebecca, that's a great idea for after the PhD. So I think it was just a confidence thing. And I was just, having come to the PhD a little bit later than a lot of students, it's just that confidence.
I recognise that confidence, and I think there's also the part of it that I recognise is the will, the wish, because I think what we sometimes paint as a successful academic career, which one thing is not what a lot of PhD graduates will actually do or want, but even those that do, a successful academic career is rarely these days on a single research question. We need that ability to go, what's adjacent? What's new and interesting? What other opportunities are coming my way? So I do think it's kind of on our generation now, isn't it? Your generation and my generation. I'm not saying we're the same generation, but it's kind of on us now to try and instill that in our PhD students, because PhD students listen to their supervisors more than they listen to anybody else. So how we get them to go, just lift your heads on a Friday afternoon, maybe, not when you're collecting things in the hospital, and see what else is out there. And that's something I think is just so important, and something I fear we've come back a little bit and need to push back on that. But that's a few years ago.
Yeah.
So that was during your PhD, you were able to fulfill your promise to TV's Professor Alice Roberts.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That must have been a great moment for you. Where did you take that next? You can tell the difference between different kinds of ivory. What does one do with that observation?
So the first thing I then wanted to do was I had a chat with a data scientist, because although I was doing some fairly basic for the field statistics in MATLAB to tell the difference between species, I wanted to be able to basically just put a user-friendly interface on this so that other people could use it. That's where my mistake with talking to a data scientist happened, because although we've had a cool project since then, I still do not have a user-friendly interface on anything. And they looked at what I'd been doing and went, no, we can do so much better than this. And so one of the problems with my data is that I probably have the largest collection of Raman spectra in the world on ivory samples.
That's the problem.
And although I've collected a lot over the years, it's in terms of statistics, obviously the bigger the better for reference spectra. So what the lovely Agil, who was a master's student at Lancaster, we had a chat, and basically we came up with the idea of using machine learning, and we trained this on a geological data set. So it's actually, the original data is taken from like Mars rover.
Oh, wow.
And things like that, because obviously bone and ivory has a mineral component to it. So we used machine learning and trained it on these geological samples, trained it to separate them out into different classes, and then we fine-tuned it on the ivory data. And Agil was able to push the accuracy of our previous statistics up to an accuracy of around 99.7%.
Wow.
Accuracy in identifying ivory from Raman spectra.
So let me just make sure I've understood. You were in a position where you knew quite a lot about your specimens. You knew that this was ivory. You just didn't know if it was mammoth ivory or elephant ivory, and you were taking spectra. But what you wanted to do, if I've understood you correctly with your student Agil, was be able to give your system specimens without having prior knowledge and let it infer what it was likely to be from the spectra. Have I got that right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we ran some tests with some samples that we knew, and we then just let the algorithm that Agil had written classify it, and we were getting really, really accurate sort of classification.
The 99.7% is the kind of number we can brush over. We shouldn't brush over it. It's amazing. It's extremely high. you can't be the first person that's ever wanted to tell apart different types of ivory, because there's lots of ivory out there. So are there other ways that one can distinguish between different types of ivory?
Yes. So when looking at a whole sort of, if we think about elephant or mammoth tusks, if you look at a cross section of it, there'll be some really pretty like cross hatchings, some lines that intersect. And these are called Schrager lines. And these were traditionally used in telling the difference between whether something was elephant or mammoth, because in the outer layers of the tusk, they have different angles that they cross over at. This isn't foolproof, and it does require you to have a whole cross section, so you know exactly whereabouts in the tusk you're looking at. This becomes a bit of a problem if an object is worked or carved.
Like the rings that Alice had found in the dig, because that's not going to be, presumably there were rings for a finger, not rings that are going to take in an entire tusk sort of diameter.
Exactly. So once the object becomes carved or worked into something, it becomes harder because you don't always know exactly where you are, and it's harder to orientate where you're looking at. So there are other techniques, and so CITES, which is the international trade people for endangered species, they then recommend as sort of gold standard, you do either DNA analysis, which will obviously tell you exactly what species it's from, or they recommend doing radiocarbon dating just to give the age of the sample. The problem with both of these is that they are destructive. So particularly if you've got a very old or a quite priceless artifact, it's not going to be something you are going
take
to rush
a chunk out
to do.
of. Yeah, for sure. So yours is a non-destructive technique. Raman is a non-destructive technique.
And also radiocarbon dating requires very specialist facilities. So some countries don't even have somewhere of their own to do that. DNA analysis, well, much more widespread, a bit easier to get your hands on, still requires some sort of specialist facilities. Raman spectroscopy has the advantage in that it's actually already used in quite a lot of places. So it's used quite a lot in the pharmaceutical industry, so particularly for measuring purity of samples if you're in a factory, or for checking, I know it's used in the aerospace industry for just checking that like a material is homogeneous, there's no sort of imperfections or impurities in it. And it's already used a lot by Border Force. So airports across the country will have one for drugs identification, because it can pick up on those biomolecular differences between samples. So you can put something in it and it can tell you whether it's paracetamol or something a bit more interesting.
Interesting. That is fascinating. And I guess as well as the interesting applications, that means that Raman kind of probes and setups are more commonplace than some of these more sophisticated measurement techniques.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've established that an archaeologist might want to establish whether this is mammoth ivory or elephant ivory. Who else wants to know?
So it was after I sort of published some of my papers that the WWF got in touch with me, and it was somebody who's based in Hong Kong. And obviously in Hong Kong and China, they've got a long-standing sort of history of placing cultural importance on ivory as a symbol of wealth and prosperity. So my contact over there is Jovi Chan, who is Wildlife Conservation Manager. And she basically said to me, so I see you've been doing this for archaeology purposes. Have you thought you could actually do some good with it? And up until...
Always direct.
Up until this point, I had been running the project mainly to impress Prof. Alice Roberts. But it was then that I thought, oh, actually, there might be some wider implications of how this could be used. So from then, it kind of snowballed. And I was invited over to Hong Kong, and I've given some talks about how my research could be used. I had some really interesting chats about how Raman spectroscopy could possibly be used for other conservation things as well, with some people from the States. So watch this space when I start scanning eggs. But so I was invited over to Hong Kong to talk about my research, and that was really helpful because I was getting to talk to people that are actually working in frontline conservation and some of the issues they face. And so the idea that we could use Raman spectroscopy, although it might not still be the gold standard for if you want to actually convict someone, for a quick test where you don't need an expert there to identify some ivory, it could be used sort of in the field. And there are handheld Raman spectrometers. They're becoming cheaper in price. Good ones are still fairly pricey. You can get very cheap ones for around £10,000. You can get a good one for about £50,000. But as the technology is developed, they are getting cheaper, they are getting smaller. They will become more accessible in future.
Fantastic. So what you're describing to me is a creative scientist at the start of their career that sees an opportunity and runs with it and has built this into a set of like research questions that could certainly furnish quite a chunky research career. You've got lots of interesting questions. I'm sure if you pursue those ones, you'd find more. But you're taking this now in an entrepreneurial direction. So what's that angle? Why did you do this? Why didn't you just sort of stay on the research track?
So again, it kind of found me. So after I published the papers and I got started working with WWF, I started getting lots of media interest. The BBC, their technology show Click did a feature on me, and I appeared in lots of news and radio sort of outlets. And from there, people started contacting me saying, I've got this bit of ivory, I would like it identified. Initially, I was quite short-sighted and sent back snotty messages saying, I want to stop the ivory trade. I think ivory looks better on the animal. But after I became involved with a group called the Meeting the Challenges of the Ivory Act group, it was then that I sort of learnt about what is legal and what is illegal to trade in the UK. So it might come as a surprise to learn that it's not illegal to trade mammoth ivory. It's very illegal to trade elephant ivory. And as we've spoken about, it can be hard to tell the difference between the two.
And why is that?
Well, it's an interesting question. So there are some scientists that think mammoth ivory should be included in the CITES list of endangered animals. But basically, because you're not killing the animal, it's not illegal.
Fair enough. It's already dead by some wide margin. Yes, okay.
And there's actually a lot of it out there. So there are people in Russia who call themselves mammoth hunters. And in these summer months, they go out with like pressure blasters and they deliberately melt the ice to uncover these perfectly preserved mammoth carcasses. And they harvest the tusks to go and sell them in the legal ivory trade. It's really interesting in Hong Kong. So it's in 2018 that Hong Kong brought in a more stricter ivory ban. And all of a sudden, all these shops that had been selling elephant ivory overnight started selling mammoth ivory instead.
Yes, okay. One has to wonder, yeah.
So obviously there's really important use for this in telling the difference between the two. But when I get people contacting me in the UK, actually a lot of them, it comes from different, there's sort of three main areas that I get requests from. Some are from private individuals. It's often they've just inherited something and they don't know what to do with it. Or a quite common story is someone that was stationed in India. You know, they've had a loved one that's just died and they were stationed in India and they brought back this item. Maybe a relative in another country wants it and they need to know exactly what it is to be able to get it over a border. So sometimes it's from private individuals. Sometimes it's from big auction houses. So I do get requests from big auction houses. Quite often that's to do with antique instruments. So things like violins, like bits of their bows might have a bit of ivory on, or something called the saddle, which can sit on top of the bridge of a violin. Those can be made of ivory, bits of guitars, bagpipes have a lot of ivory on them.
So that's what the white sort of bagpipe made out of, is it? Okay,
traditionally.
Right. I never really thought about that, yeah.
So sometimes it's from auction houses, and that's often to do with musical instruments. And then sometimes it's just requests from museums. They've got something, they have a policy, they'll only display a certain type of ivory. Sometimes it's just really interesting. Like I got a request, which did ring a few alarm bells when I had to ask to bring a gun on campus. But it was...
Why was there a gun?
So it was from a museum and this gun had been on the Titanic and on the handle, there was some ivory inlays and they were just interested to know whether it was made of mammoth or elephant ivory.
Oh, brilliant.
From posterity's sake. It would have been more common and it would have been more traditional in keeping with the design of the gun for it to be elephant. But the person that had this gun was known to be a bit of a maverick and maybe possibly requested it to be mammoth ivory instead.
I can only imagine the paperwork in getting permission to bring that particular artefact into an academic environment. What fun that must have been. And what was it?
So I've still not done that work yet.
Okay.
We are waiting. We've had to get lots of permissions to do things. But thankfully, the inlays come off, we've found. So it doesn't look like, that we're going to have to bring a full gun on campus.
Okay.
Just the ivory inlays.
That's definitely going to make your sort of paperwork a little bit more straightforward, I would say. Brilliant. So you've got this situation where you've got this really interesting set of research questions and methods and techniques which could quite happily absorb all your time, but you've got this increasing demand. Your success in your academic role has brought you to the attention of a lot of non-academic potential sort of partners, customers, I don't know what I'm going to call them. And you said initially you were a little bit resistant to this, but you started to see how it could be useful, positive. So what did you do next? How did you start thinking about some of these approaches? Did you decide you wanted to work with some of them? How did you achieve that?
So it was probably, I was voicing my concerns over some of these requests I was getting to my line manager, who's always been very supportive of lots of the strange things that I occasionally ask to do. And it was around that time that I saw the advert for the University Enterprise Fellowship. And I can't remember if it's my manager mentioned it to me or I mentioned it to her, but we started thinking, well, actually, maybe there could be some utility in sort of having the service. And because I'm fairly new to this idea of commercializing or creating a business out of my research, So I applied for the University Enterprise Fellowship. I've promised you all sorts of things that haven't quite come to fruition yet.
Yet.
Progress is being made. And I was really grateful that you awarded me the fellowship, because over the last year, I have had time to sit down and think about how to do this properly.
And what needs to be in place? So universities, we're not contract research organisations, but we do contract research. It's across any institution, including ours. It's quite variable, and the culture varies and the practice varies. So what have you found that works, that helps? Have you tried any routes that really don't work? I suppose I'm sort of asking, if you've got someone else who wants to do something a little bit similar to you, not with Ivory and Raman, but like that sort of service provision from inside a university, what kind of guidance or steer might you give them?
So the biggest hurdle I've found is in the finance side of things. It's just getting the pricing right, in finding who really understands what I'm trying to do. And actually, I've needed to be more flexible with what I've thought I've needed. So at the start, I was very much, I'm having a set price list. I'm not faffing around recalculating this for everyone that makes a request. But then actually, some of the requests I get are so varied and so weird that they don't all fit under one price thing. And then also for me as a researcher, obviously money is never the secondary thing. We're all trying to get money to do research. It's being really strict that actually for this sort of thing, I'm not doing it for fun. My time has value. And it's being strict about making sure I calculate exactly what gets included. And that's not come naturally to me, because I just get excited, go, oh, you're going to give me something interesting to look at. So it's negotiating with clients. Those have all been big learning curves for me in how I communicate and exactly what I can promise to do. So one of the key things I needed to do, and I did at the start, was I spoke to some people that work in UK policy, particularly around the Ivory Trade Act. And I've spoken to people that work in AIFA, who are the people that regulate the ivory trade in the UK. So that's the Animal and Health Plant Agency. And I've spoken to a few experts that do just visual identification of ivory. And I've tried to figure out exactly what would be needed in a report for them to show it to somebody at any of these agencies, and those agencies to go, yeah, looks legit. And for those people not to have wasted their money in asking me to look at their ivory for them. So I've had to figure out exactly what I need to include. And so that does include me sort of visually inspecting the item, taking lots of photographs, both just normal photograph and then with a sort of special microscope that I've got, looking at any visual features that might indicate whether it is from an elephant, a mammoth, a hippo, or a warthog, or whatever. And then I do the Raman spectroscopy. And particularly with my qualifications and my publication history, as that's increasing, it makes me look more like an expert in what I'm doing. And to be fair, there's probably not many people in the world that know Ivory and Raman quite as well as I do. So it's just trying to figure out exactly what I was offering and nailing that down. And then one of the other big things that I had to think about a lot was legality of everything. What was I covered to do? If somebody gives me an expensive item, how is that insured to be on a university site? If I make a mistake, I don't want to go to prison.
And
I'm not setting out to make mistakes, but just to know exactly what happens in those situations and to check that I'm covered, which all sounds quite boring, but also better than going to prison.
It's necessary to pull, from the prison angle, but others as well. I do think it's a really important observation that's worth us kind of risk of labouring. But I think as academics, what we're sort of praised for and rewarded for is that intellectual curiosity, that following the interesting threads. And that's what indeed characterised the early part of your career when you were off on these research side quests. But if you're trying to create something that is financially sustainable as well as sustainable in the broader sense, you can't be doing things just because they're interesting. It helps if they're interesting, but you do need to have that costing mindset, that sort of structural mindset, that what does the client, the customer want? Even that language is alien to us as researchers quite frequently, but it is really important that this isn't going to be just an interesting side project that fizzles out because it's not properly sustainable.
Yeah, and all those things are really important. And there were some, so obviously I needed to have my protocols down. And so lots of sort of the early part of the fellowship was on sorting out the admin side of what I would be doing, what I needed to go forwards. And something I hadn't planned on doing, but I did use the Enterprise Fellowship for, was identified that if I'm using different types of Raman spectroscopy equipment, and occasionally borrowing handhelds to go out into the field to see people, what's actually been really valuable is that I undertook a laser safety qualification, which again just means that when I'm taking things out, I can do all the safety calculations in the field, make sure I'm not going to accidentally blind someone with a laser.
That would not land all that well with a customer. No, and I can see the importance of that. And yes, it might be the admin bits, but actually if those are the barriers to you achieving what you want to achieve, they've got to be done, right? And at least the fellowship gives you some time to do that. So this is obviously you taking your research in a more commercial direction, but is there a sort of feedback loop? Do any of the specimens that you've been asked to look at, or just the proposals that are put to you, Do they ever give you research ideas? Do you ever feed that back into your sort of creative research process?
So I do have a line that anything I identify, that spectra gets to be included in my database.
Excellent.
So, and obviously that then feeds on into being able to work on the more conservation, the more those sorts of sides of the research, and then just improving the data set that I have available at the moment. And some of the profits from what I'm doing at the moment, I have my discretionary account, which I describe as my piggy bank, and I'm saving up for a handheld ramen of my own. So eventually I will get there. And then I think that's when it will be much easier for me with the business, is when I've got my own bit of equipment. And increasingly, what I find is that the customers, the clients, they want me to be able to go to them. So some of these items, they are really expensive. They might be weird and bulky in size. And it's just better for some clients if I can travel to them, do the inspection with them.
So you've got interesting research questions and interesting research findings coming out of it, and you've got hopefully a little bit of like revenue, a little bit of surplus coming in that can help you buy your own piece of kit. Where do you see this going in the longer term? Where do you want it to go in the longer term? Does this remain within the university? Does this feel like a spin out or a startup, or is this something different?
I don't know. It's been interesting events recently where I've had people sort of encourage me to think a bit bigger. At the moment, I'm quite happy with the idea of it staying under the University of Bristol umbrella. I'm quite happy with that. I would really like the idea that we could train up more people to be able to do what I'm doing. So ivory identification in the UK or worldwide, it's a really shortage skill set. There's not that many people who are appropriately qualified to look at ivory items and accurately say what they are. So I think it would be lovely if we could start training up a few other people to work in this. I would love it if the business could become sort of self-sustaining. So my aim for just this year was that sort of one day of my time could be accounted for in sort of the profits from it. We've not quite got there yet, but we are getting there. And so my aim would be able to employ somebody and then maybe have a few students doing research things related, just so we've got a small group of people who are all capable to do it. Because one of the problems with the business, as it were, at the moment is that that there is one point of failure.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it. Yeah,
that is me. So obviously, for it to be more sustaining, we need to sort of look at where points of failure are and just train other people up, just for the sake of this niche skill set that it would be nice for more people to be able to do.
But also that lets you scale a little bit, right? You know, if you were able to get to the point where you had 3 or 4, a couple of technicians, 3 or 4 postgrads or something like that doing this, it also means you can take commissions in more than one place at the same time, right? You're not having to sort of try and distribute yourself all over the UK and beyond. And I'm guessing this is beyond the UK, right? This can't just be a domestic market.
So I do get emails from people overseas at the moment. I do have to turn them down, but just because of the issues with getting ivory across borders.
But if you had a portable setup, that would be a different matter.
Yes, so I would go visit them. And there are other things that I would love to be able to include in the service. So I would love for us to just be able to do our own DNA analysis if required. There are other techniques that I'd like to explore a little bit. So there is what's described as being minimally destructive technique, which uses proteomics. So you sort of take just a little surface scraping and look at the collagens. I would like to be able to explore that a little bit more as sort of a hybrid between just doing the ramen, but not actually have to destroy a bit entirely to do the DNA testing. And then there are some other techniques that might be able to give us some complementary information about sort of exactly the geography of where a sample's from.
Mm-hmm.
So X-ray fluorescence may have some utility in that. So there's other techniques as well I'd like to explore and see how they can be used to build up a bigger picture.
Yeah, augment your service, as it were.
Yeah.
I mean, you started as a biomedical scientist, you moved into anatomy through your PhD, and here you are using some proper hardcore physics with some meaty data science in the sort of analytical side to look at specimens that sit across archaeology, heritage, music. I mean, talk about interdisciplinary. This is radically interdisciplinary stuff. How is that for you? Do you find joy in that? Do you find challenge in that? Do you find sort of different practices between the physicists that you work with and the archaeologists that you work with and the anatomists you work with? How do you get on with that?
I love it. I just like learning about new things. I like talking to people about what they do. I love being able to set up a new collaboration with someone. It keeps me excited. It keeps me enjoying my job as a researcher. There are challenges with some of the data science team I was working with. Obviously, in chemistry, when you talk about organic materials and inorganic materials, they have particular meanings.
Mm-hmm.
The data scientists didn't understand this, and so they kept on referring to the mineral, the geological data set as the inorganic, and then anything that was to do with an elephant as the organic, because it's coming from a living thing.
Because it's an organism, which you can see where they're
You can
coming
absolutely
from.
see,
but,
and I am
yeah.
sure that there are lots of terms that I used in statistics and data science that they were laughing at me about. So there's sometimes sort of literal language challenges. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to figure out what's actually feasible, because you can have lots of ideas. You can sit, you have coffee and go, yeah, let's do that. And then actually realize that, oh no, when they've said that, they might want to destroy a little bit, and you can't do that on a museum specimen. But on the whole, I think science is better for getting other people from different disciplines to give their point of view, because everybody will look at it from a slightly different angle. For example, I refer to the handheld Raman as like being the equivalent of point of care testing if you're in hospital, because that's the terminology and that's the way of thinking things that I'm familiar with. So I think that everybody should strive to work with people that aren't necessarily in their discipline, or at least occasionally have a chat with them.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I like to find ways to encourage and reward people doing that. Looking at it, I suppose, from the other side, though, universities, because they're usually large and fairly complex organisations, we still have to sort of compartmentalise people and put them in their boxes, however much we might not like to. So we all sit in departments and schools and divisions and so on, and you sit in anatomy, which is a fairly small school, like my own is. How has the reception been within your own professional environment in anatomy, whether that's within the university or within the country, to what you're doing, which is so radically interdisciplinary, and it's also quite commercially minded, where a lot of university departments are usually quite kind of pure research and education. So how has it landed with your peers?
So it is interesting. At my previous institution, actually, it wasn't that well, because I was based within a small med school. And there were a few comments about how, oh, this doesn't really fit. You're going to have to go in with ref with a different department and things like that. So it didn't land well in my last institution necessarily. Obviously, with the people I was working with, we were all quite excited about it. Moving to School of Anatomy at Bristol, one lovely thing about the School of Anatomy is that it's the only place in the country that does a purely comparative degree. So we're probably the only place in the country where you've got anatomists that teach both human and veterinary. And so from that point of view, my research has been better accepted.
A niche,
Yeah. Within the School of Anatomy as well, although I've not been there that long, they do have a history of commercialising certain things. So they do run certain courses. There's a lot of different expertise in our schools. So from that point of view, it's been quite well received. I've been fortunate to have a line manager who definitely encouraged me down this enterprise fellowship route and is very keen to encourage it where those opportunities lie. What's been really nice is I have had a couple of other people talk to me about whether or not they should put in an enterprise fellowship application, or just somebody that has a slight business outside of the university and they want to know how to bring that in. And although they're not doing the exact same things as me, it's as though I've just sort of raised a bit more awareness about what's going on. Brilliant. Or that it is possible to do it, even if you are doing something as weird and niche sounding as just looking at ivory with lasers. There might be a bigger interest in this, and the university does have lots of ways in which they can support you doing that.
I love that, because that was always one of my aspirations with the Enterprise Fellowship scheme, is that I can try and get into schools and go, hey, do this stuff, it's really cool and it's fun and we support it and we reward it and we recognise it. But it has much more authenticity and resonance if it comes from someone from within that environment. They can see it, they can trust it, they can believe it, because they're your office next door neighbours or your teaching buddies or whatever it might be. So it's really pleasing to hear that that's working, because I think that's really powerful. You can be in lots of places that I can't, and that's true of all of our Enterprise Fellows. We've talked quite a bit about the Enterprise Fellowship, and I'm delighted that it's been of such benefit to you. Are there other mechanisms you found, or particular ways of approaching your work that you found to be beneficial, that, again, you might recommend to some of these peers that come to you and say, how are you achieving what you're achieving? Are there things that are particularly useful?
I think another really useful thing that I found through the Enterprise Fellowship is, because I'm still relatively new to Bristol, is that it has meant I can meet lots of other people. It has meant that I can just, even people that are doing quite radically different types of enterprise, it's just about having that network, and they've all been so friendly. So you might imagine that because we're all trying to set up businesses, it's all a bit more cutthroat, but it's not in the slightest. Everyone's just been really helpful, from whether or not they're just saying to me, you could ask for a mentor. You could get somebody, there are sort of enterprise people in residence that can talk to you about how to do this. You can think about doing it on a bigger scale. And just learning. So I know Lucy Cramp also has an enterprise fellowship, and she's got a much more established sort of analytical service. It's really interesting what she's doing. It's not the same thing, but it is similar in sort of service style. So it's having that network and just meeting people from across the university has been really helpful for me, for the business, and just as a newish member of staff, sort of getting to meet people outside, as you described, sort of my university silo.
Yeah, we all need ways to do that, and it's sometimes not as easy as it sounds. So it's really great to have a mechanism to try and do that and break out of your local environment. So Rebecca, what you've been describing is, well, one way to describe it might be an internal service unit. I appreciate it may go externally, but at the moment what you're doing is a service within the university, but it's very much designed and conceived to provide services to external clients. I'm seeing a bit of demand for this. I'm seeing an increase in the interest in that kind of methodology. So if you were to meet, let's say, one of next year's Enterprise Fellows who is interested in doing this sort of thing, not necessarily in your area, what advice, what pointers would you give them?
So I know for myself, I still find it quite hard to call myself an expert in something.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, by the very nature that you have done a PhD, you are working in research in a university, you are probably one of the only people in the world that's doing exactly what you're doing, or one of the very few people that's working in a broader sense of your area. And I think once you realise that and you realise what value your expertise can give other people, it is a bit of a mindset change. And I do remember the first time that I think I was on a radio show and somebody went, and Rebecca is a leading expert in ivory identification. And I had a moment of, ooh. Because although I do know quite a bit about it, it's still scary being called the expert. But if you are an expert in something, there is somebody that wants that knowledge. There is definitely something you could possibly do. You could possibly work with somebody else. And it might not always be obvious. So, I mean, I'm fairly lucky in that my clients mostly find me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I decided to go for the Enterprise Fellowship based on the fact that people were contacting
Mm-hmm.
me. It might be that you've already had a couple of people say, oh, actually, do you know what? We work doing this, and it would be really interesting if you could come and use your technology and see if it would work looking at whatever it is they do. So just keep an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be as stubborn-minded as I was with the first few initial inquiries I had about identifying people's ivory. And just have that confidence to think, oh, could I do this? And it's probably just worth, at a really early stage, going and talking to somebody in the research and enterprise team.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of people here at the university. Bristol's actually really good for having a whole variety of people. Like, even before you start trying to commercialize something, there's, I think, a separate team for pre and post commercialization. There are separate teams for it even. So there's lots of people out there that can support you. And even if it's just, oh, I've got a little idea, they might be able to put you in touch with somebody else that has not the same idea, but a similar idea, or is doing a similar kind of service or a similar kind of product. And if you just go and talk to them at an early stage, you might actually be able to move on a bit quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I know there have been times I've floundered a little bit because I'm quite pig-headed, and I was like, well, I can solve this myself. And actually, there are people who are better at business than me. There are people at this university whose whole role is to help academics get better at doing business. And so if you reach out to them, they can help you.
I get that. I have to pull you up on the pig-headed thing. I would call that determined and resilience. But also, yes, there are in our university and other universities, they're going to be experts in commercialization and collaboration. But just because they're the experts doesn't mean that we, the academics, can't also become the experts in that. We can all learn. And actually, I think sometimes as academics, it's my view, but we trade on our expertise in our academic discipline. That's how we identify almost. But to be able to say, actually, I don't know much about the business side. I don't know much about commercialization. I don't know much about contracting, but I'm willing to be a novice and learn from others. It can be quite a scary thing to do as an established academic, but it's also a really, really valuable thing to do. Something can be very, enriching, empowering to learn a new skill when you already had a bunch of other skills anyway, but you wanted a new one all the same.
Yeah, and they're important skills to learn. Definitely sort of some of the organisation I've had to sort of get my head around for doing this when I get back into managing my lab. These are really useful skills, sort of mapping things out, being a bit more specific in my research. So I've had to learn to be very direct in what I'm promising to do and what I will deliver for clients. Actually, that's not a bad skill to have for your research, to be a little bit. Although in research, I'm all about fun and I don't mind some open-ended questions, but actually narrowing things down and being more specific is not a bad skill to have. But also I've had, when I first started out as a lecturer, I did have another lecturer say to me that actually being a researcher, it's really interesting because you do all this teaching and then when you have your own lab, it's like having your own mini business anyway. You've got to bring in that income. You've got to manage that income. You'll have staff. You have to manage where all that's going. So it's probably not a bigger leap for lots of people as they imagine it might be.
As they think it might be. Yeah. I've heard that. That's fascinating. Just sort of staying for a moment with the sort of internal service unit. It's not a very good terminology, I need a better name for it, but I am seeing an increase in demand from this. I'm seeing it from the academics because through fellowship applications and through other inquiries, it does seem to be there's a growing enthusiasm from researchers to work in this way. But the fact that they are approaching me, usually the ones that I'm most keen to get behind are the ones that already evidence the need, like you did. You were able to say, you don't take my word for it that there's a demand for this analysis. Here are all the people that have contacted me asking me to do it. So it feels like there's an increasing demand from our side, an increasing demand from industry side. Do you agree? And if so, do you attribute that to anything in particular?
I do wonder if some of the museum requests I'm getting at the moment are because there's less money going into museums. And so actually, whereas maybe they would have had a bit more expert services in-house previously, they now don't. So I am wondering if it's something to do with that. I think in the last round of government sort of funding, I know lots of museums are really struggling now. So they're having to close down some services that they may have had previously.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe just a greater awareness that universities are open and willing to engage. We're not just these snooty people in ivory towers.
Literally in your case.
Literally in an ivory tower, or a tower filled with ivory. But we are a bit more open. We are more accessible. There are people doing podcasts. There are people that are on TV that are more accessible. You know, you can see academics. You can see that they are just fairly normal people. And you're more willing to send them an email as opposed to them being sort of these lofty, crusty old people that you might... You're
we all know the image, but that's not what we look like, right?
No.
And that's not what a lot of our colleagues look like as well. Absolutely. I love that. And I can't believe Ivory Tower has only just occurred to me. It's funny in this context. Rebecca, thank you so much. I have one final question for you, but thank you for being so generous with all your time and insights. You started off quite a long way away from where you are now. You started off in biomedical sciences. You started your career in the NHS, having even done a placement there. And then you went back to do a PhD at a brave time in your life with a very small child. I mean, goodness me knows that's difficult enough without throwing a PhD into the mix. So the Rebecca of undergraduate days, the Rebecca of embarking on a PhD, what would she think if she were to look at where you are and what you're doing and where you're going with it and the impact you're having? Would she be surprised? Would she be intrigued? What would that Rebecca say?
I think she'd be quite impressed. I've never really had lots of long-term goals. I'm quite happy with saying yes to opportunities that come up. And I have always been fairly happy with that. I've never mapped out my life as to what I was going to be at a certain stage. I left university and went and worked in the NHS. I enjoyed the job for a bit and then I wanted something else. I think past Rebecca would be impressed. I think she'd be pleased that she's been able to sort of make the most of just random opportunities that head my way.
And what would you say to her?
Just do what you're enjoying. I've been really lucky. I really enjoyed my PhD. I've really enjoyed teaching and the research that I've got involved with since. And that really helps. And I know that sometimes you have to do bits and jobs that you don't enjoy. And there are bits of my job that, I sort of roll my eyes at. But on the whole, I feel really lucky. Because I've said yes to so many opportunities, I actually now get to do the opportunities that I enjoy. Possibly, I would tell past Rebecca to say no to a few bits as well. Obviously, when you're an early career researcher, it's really tempting just to say yes to every opportunity.
Yep.
Sometimes be a bit more selective in what's actually going to add value. There's some society roles I've had that actually didn't give me a lot of value, but did take up a lot of my time that could have possibly been better spent elsewhere. But also, I suppose you don't know that until you do them.
That's the thing. Sometimes I think you need to try these things to then look back and go, if you do it once and you don't enjoy it, fine, just don't do it again. That's my maxim. You can't always get these things right first time.
Yeah.
Dr. Rebecca Shepherd, thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating and insightful and inspiring discussion. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for your time. And I am very much looking forward to seeing what you do next. I hope you get your Raman spectrometer for Christmas. I really hope you're able to do that and then go out to see even more exciting specimens at bedside, as it were, to keep your medical analogy.
Thank you very much.